Audio Jungle.
Jamhuri ya Kenya na kuitumikia kwa moyo wangu wote.
Mimi nimekuwa ndani ya siasa hii muda huu wote mrefu sana.
Kenya also has a history, and I think our analysis of that history told us that we tended to make the same mistakes and we had the same assumptions over time about the economy and about how this country is organized.
Kenya's rich history has seen it grow from a young independent country in East Africa to a regional player of notable stature in the world stage. In the year 2000, based on the economic and institutional models that have dominated Kenya's past, the Institute of Economic Affairs came up with 4 probable outcomes that the country may face in the next 20 years. They called them Kenya at the Crossroads, Scenarios for Our Future. These outcomes sought to find out what Kenya might look like given the nature of the state and the economy. What choices would we make? What choices would we like others to make? What would we do to assist them in making those choices? It was these questions that led to the 4 outcomes or scenarios. The flying geese scenario involved simultaneous economic, political, and institutional transformation of the country, resulting in inclusive democracy and economic growth. Katiba was a scenario that saw institutional transformation as a key to reform, but which depicted instability and little economic improvement. Maendeleo was an economic reform scenario which focused initial rapid gains but accompanied by severe inequalities and instability. El Niño, a scenario of decline and disintegration as a result of no political or economic reforms.
Scenarios are not predictions. Scenarios are just planning tools that helped us to start conversations about what kind of Kenya would I like to see given the facts that exist today. We were just saying that this is one of the possible futures that we could face if certain trends continued and if certain factors came together.
Between 2002 and 2007, the country witnessed a Maendeleo type of scenario where, due to government's policies to revive the economy and create wealth, the country experienced accelerated economic growth from 0.6% in 2002 to 6.1% by the end of 2007. However, this growth was not shared, thus creating deeper inequalities between regions and among people. The political elite were the most beneficiaries of this growth, creating a disgruntled segment of the population, mostly the poor. This strategy proved to be unsustainable after some time. A demand for political transformation through the constitutional reform process gave Kenya an opportunity to travel through the Katiba scenario. These efforts were thwarted when selfish interests carried the day and when the draft constitution was rejected during the referendum in 2005.
We want peace, but we want justice.
Kenya witnessed an El Niño type of scenario in the days and weeks following the announcement of the presidential results in December 2007. Evidently, there was declining capacity of the state to provide security in certain parts of the country. Informalization and privatization of security arrangements legitimized ethnic militia, escalating regional conflicts, a highly militarized environment, and a great magnitude of resource depletion. Currently, Kenya has a population of approximately 41 million and is growing at the rate of 1 million a year. Of these, 43% are between the ages of 0 and 14, 35% between 15 and 34, and the rest are 35 and above. This means 78% of Kenyans are below the age of 35. Studies tracked over time show that such a population structure has a 26% probability of civil war. The probability increases by 150% when the population of youth that is relatively well educated and unemployed increases. Unfortunately, such countries usually do not sustain economic growth beyond 3.6% due to a high dependency ratio. That is, instead of most people using the bulk of their resources to save and invest, they spend it on taking care of the big non-working population, which includes the youth. As more women give birth later to fewer children and as they space their children more, the child population is shrinking and the youth population is increasing or bulging. Studies show that this is yet to peak and may probably do around the year 2020. What does this mean for Kenya's future? It is in answering this question that we went around the country seeking young people's views about the very drivers that will determine Kenya's future. All the regions had different definitions of who they thought the youth are.
The majority, fresh and dynamic, a mindset, unemployed, techno-service takers, creative risk takers, creative and innovative, easily manipulated,
The discussions we had in the regions bring out very different issues. It's like we live in 8 different regions or countries.
These people also feel like they carry the burden of their tribe to that office. People will argue about qualification, people will argue about alienation and things like that, but then in a country like this, we have not yet gotten to a point where merit is what that everyone looks at whenever you get into an office, because for starters, we don't identify ourselves as Kenyans.
It's not the system. Even right now, there is a system whereby there is a government land which is GL, but still the system inatumika watu wanaenda kwa. Even if you change the system, the people are still the same. But we need a place where sisi wenyewe as a community tukue nazo hizo land as entitled.
Education available to them is limited. Before, those who are educated were being educated specifically by the churches, specifically by the Catholic Church and the French Church. Now, the beneficiaries who are our parents and our grandparents have not invested in us, still expecting the same churches to do, which they are no longer doing.
If Somalia was peaceful the way it was before, if today the people of Northeastern Province were asked, do you want to secede? Of course, a bigger percentage of them will say yes. Why? Because these people feel very, very impressed and marginalized.
Who are people who are tammacking on the streets? Who are in prisons? Who is suffering from HIV the most? Who are the most illiterate in Kenya? If you think about everything that is negative, it is young people who are affected the most.
After all these diverse views, representatives from the different regions came together to have honest discussions on what drivers, based on the outcomes in the regions, would influence Kenya's future. They deliberated, listened, laughed, argued, and agreed on the drivers that would encompass what Kenyan youth feel would be the future in the next 20 years.
The different stories were anchored on 2 main issues: level of youth participation and the level of equality.
It is from these discussions that these stories are told.
Ndiyo wajibu wetu, Kenya istahili heshima, tuungane mikono pamoja kazini, kila siku tuwe na shukrani.
These are the youth scenarios. Kenya in 2031.
shikwa mkate na maji wenyeji tuna have kuweka vichwa juu ya maji mtahave kututafuta kwa ma mixtapes all searching imagine survive kwa projects za ghetto marival ni macops na marifle ukiexpect nimbe nyimbo zina maana napokama kwa project God na provide mana timiza ajira na usifaka pusanii ndio stick na mila itabidi tulize stress na nii ndani ya streets za D by enemies my enemies wanataka kunikiss.
That the long-term health of this country requires that we exercise the ghost of corruption.
The violent protests across Kenya have been fatal and disruptive.
Kenya is not a banana republic. Kenya is not a war-torn country. Kenya is not a country that does not have a governance structure.
Just as a waterfall has great momentum as it falls off the ledge, but progressively loses thrust as it advances, young people retreat from political participation after intense demands for job creation are effectively addressed, and the country's economy grows, with the leadership ensuring equal distribution. How did it start? A post-2007 Vijana Tugutuke caravan sees the election of many young people, but in junior positions. The new national government, elected on a platform of constitutional implementation, suffers temporary setbacks when its initial attempts to usurp county government responsibilities and resources are challenged in a court by a vibrant Linda Katiba Citizens Coalition. Job-seeking youth flock county capitals that are ill-prepared with this large influx. Meanwhile, the Vijana Tugutuke campaign transforms into a youth-centered mass movement demanding government's response to a rise in living costs and unemployment. In January 2014, Occupy government sit-ins targeting all 47 counties begin. Fearing an uprising, the government negotiates with them and by 2016 starts the implementation of a revamped Kazi kwa Vijana program. Public education, health and housing are subsidized under the innovative Invest in Kenya campaign. In 2017, due to inadequate resources, most youth lose elections, with Kenya getting its first blind governor. The global economy is at freefall, and the government is forced to decrease the minimum wage so as to avoid layoffs. Kenya gradually becomes attractive to foreign investors as labor costs fall. High costs are levied on workers for the government to be able to service national debt and sustain high government expenses, which are no longer supported by donors. Most youth have become disengaged with politics, focusing instead on their own economic success. IT-savvy youth make cybercrime the new challenge for law enforcers, and attempts to revive the youth movement fails. The 2022 elections are uneventful as voter apathy among young people is at its peak. The new hand-picked successor to the retiring incumbent puts in place a systemic privatization program causing a steady rise of the country's GDP. In 2024, a basket fund set up to facilitate youth participation is shut down due to low uptake and corruption. The 2020 UN special meeting hosted on Somalia, where all interested parties including Jubaland, Somaliland and Puntland agreed on a formula forward, including a referendum for Kenyan counties bordering Somalia, holds a second meeting in 2025, this time in Mogadishu. They celebrate the successful ceasing of the conflict and negotiate the reunification of the country through the democratic reincorporation of its breakaway regions. By December 2026, the East African community finally begins its transition to a political federation, beginning with the introduction of a ceremonial regional government. In 2027, Kenya elects her first 75-year-old female president. She is tasked with appointing a new administration due to mass retirements. In the meantime, a combined public university student conference in 2030 passes a resolution to end the inertia of Kenyan youth by discussing ways of making their presence, priorities, and potential tangible in Kenya under the slogan, "Leaders today, not tomorrow." In January 2032, Kenya starts preparing for a referendum on counties that want to join Somalia, which by this time has had a very successful Open for Business campaign. Like a tsunami's enormous destructive power, high inequality breeds disenfranchised youth who refuse to resign to their fate and form a revolutionary front, strongest in coast and northeastern provinces, to fight for secession. By 2031, Kenya is under a state of emergency. How did this happen? The government elected in 2012 is slow in implementing the constitutional reforms, giving way to disillusioned youth. County governments are unprepared for transition, and the global financial crisis makes life hard, especially for young people who begin to question this economy that only benefits a handful. They aggressively demand for a transparent channeling of resources, and through this, build a movement that encourages young people to vie for elective posts. There is growing disenchantment towards religion and the family, which are largely perceived as inadequate, and in a country increasingly influenced by global norms, many embrace alternative lifestyles. A successful 2017 election sees more youth elected but hold junior positions. The young leaders eventually get frustrated at the failure to influence meaningful change. The political class, fully united behind the Watermelon Brigade, stalls the constitutional implementation process. They also argue that Kenya is not ready for political federation, hence they lobby for the EAC to remain a purely economic union. Rampant privatization of national institutions skyrockets unemployment as the economy stagnates and donors dwindle. There are massive layoffs, deepening inequality and escalating crime, with ICT-based fraud rivaling violent offenses. Kenya enters another era of street mass actions, inspired by popular uprisings elsewhere. The state responds with brutal force, inspiring a new donor-funded youth party, Haki Yetu, which has a landslide win in the 2022 elections. The 35-year-old president is from the marginalized northeastern province, and the average age of government leaders drops to 30 years with a gender parity of 40%. Haki Yetu prioritizes the implementation of the 2010 constitution. However, the new national government faces stiff resistance and sabotage from the old guard, paralyzing the inexperienced group of leaders and forcing it to give in to the demands of the corporate sector. Some counties become successful and are even able to supplant the national government's responsibilities, thus seeking autonomy from the central government. They become more territorial and through protectionist policies try and restrict aliens. Others are crippled by factional wars, escalating intra-county migration. Following the successful re-entry of Somalia into the global family of nations in 2023, several counties formerly of Northeastern Province demand a repeat of the independence-era referendum. This is granted based on the South Sudan model. A similar call by coastal counties is denied, and immediately a youth militia group declares war. The president finds himself fighting allegations questioning his identity as a Kenyan. Prior to the 2027 elections, Haki Yetu party is largely divided. The new president, whose political career stretches back over 40 years, is forced to make political concessions that roll back gains made under the Haki Yetu era. In 2029, the proposed referendum for northeastern counties is postponed, and youth militia in 10 counties across the Kenyan coast and northern regions unite to form a revolutionary front. A state of emergency is declared in the region. By 2031, Kenya is a deeply divided country, with county boundaries acting effectively as country boundaries. For some, the future has never looked brighter. For millions others, it has never been so bleak. Like a pond whose stagnant water cannot provide safe drinking water, the pond scenario is a story of inertia by most youth because of high inequality. Bad governance, human rights abuses, impunity, among others, breed an ungovernable country that eventually fails. How did this happen? In 2012, the few young people elected are held hostage to a system of political patronage that weakens their independence and ability to drive any real change. The next 5 years are characterized by corruption, with the executive being accused of compromising the independence of the controller of budgets. This delays the release of funds from the National Treasury to some counties, exacerbating inequality and provoking a push for complete autonomy. Politicians take advantage of this gap, and tribalism within the counties sees non-indigenous communities denied opportunities on the basis of their ancestral origin. The judiciary, deluged by a flood of constitutional cases and crippled by financial restraints, is unable to move rapidly in resolving the numerous court cases. Citing financial inability, the state delays the constitutional implementation process. Kenyans grow increasingly disillusioned as the global financial crisis worsens, foreign investments diminish, and the national debt grows. Agriculture and tourism are particularly hard hit at a time when fuel costs keep rising, causing the Kenyan shilling to plummet. The cost of living and unemployment rates rise. The government's Special Crime Investigation Squad to curb cyber fraud, vigilante groups, illegal drugs, and robbery with violence later becomes a death squad. In the 2017 elections, a leading political opposition candidate is assassinated, throwing the country into disarray. Ensuing demonstrations and fights between rival youth gangs associated with particular candidates are quelled by brute military force. The East Africa Community and other international organizations conduct inquiries, but fearing a repeat of the post-2007 election violence, rally behind the government. Low voter turnout and the narrow win by the incumbent deepen the division in the country. When the judiciary throws out a highly publicized case on the flimsy basis of technicalities, impunity is further ingrained. Kenya turns east when most traditional donors withhold funding. Controversial in this regard is a new land policy encouraging the lease of prime agricultural land to grow food exclusively for export. Counties able to enter into agreements secure lucrative contracts as food insecurity looms in Kenya. They eventually form the C15 group, introduce protectionist measures to guard their interests from intra-county migration. Youth from low-performing counties flock other East African countries to look for work. Tourism drops, and the main GDP earners become IT and the food export zones. In 2018, an East Africa Community report details human rights abuses in Kenya and the increase of political refugees. A UN report also identifies Kenya as a drug hub of Africa. By 2019, the UN announces its plans to move its UNEP headquarters to Arusha, marking the exit of other international organizations as well. Spades of kidnappings, grenade and bomb attacks are blamed on a secessionist movement following government's dismissal of its demands. As northern and coastal counties get implicated in the global analysis of terrorism, the state suspends elements of the Bill of Rights on the grounds of security. Disenfranchised youth fall victim to criminal activities and health complications emanating from drug and alcohol abuse, now competing with STIs as the leading cause of death among 15 to 30-year-olds. Social institutions, especially the family and religious institutions, seem unable to cope due to a weakened moral authority. In January 2022, the secessionist movement in northern and coastal regions declares these regions in the process of becoming independent from Kenya. Supporters are urged to boycott elections, and in preparation for independence, the movement publishes its manifesto, which the national government dismisses as a seditious publication. 2022 has the lowest voter turnout, and the new president, a son-in-law of the retiring incumbent, pledges to continue the policies of the previous administration. By 2025, Kenya is consistently topping polls as the most corrupt country, making it more difficult to do business in the country compared to its EAC partners. The legalization of homosexuality in 2024 through a Supreme Court amendment is extended to allow gay couples to legally be able to adopt children in 2026. The 2027 polls take place in an atmosphere of heightened tensions as secessionists make good their threat through armed persuasion, attracting a heavy military presence. A retired military colonel is elected in a poll marred by allegations of electoral fraud. Drought strikes the country in 2028. The UN leads the world in offering humanitarian help, but hundreds die. The government sends the military to protect the foreign-owned food export zones from invasion by the locals. All EAC countries set up ICT hubs rivaling Kenya and are uncomfortable with Kenya's dominance. On December 1st, 2030, secessionist counties declare themselves a separate country. Attempts by the religious coalition to broker peace are shrugged off by the state, and after giving the rebel counties 3 days to revoke the declaration, the government military machine declares war on them. The EAC, AU, IGAD, and UN all mount emergency peace missions, but by 2031, Kenya is in every way a failed state. Like an ocean covers 70% of the Earth's surface, Kenya has equitable distribution of resources by 2031 due to young people's active participation and a responsive leadership that adequately invests in the bulging youth population through social programs. How did this happen? The 2012 elections are successful, but 2013 is dominated by county and national government disputes. The judiciary demonstrates independence and integrity in its judgments. Aggressive civic education campaigns on devolution and strategic planning processes enlist citizens' active participation. With time, the devolution structure draws global attention as service delivery is improved. Extensive debate throughout this period on coastal and northeastern counties which seek to secede see the introduction of a secession bill in 2015 that is eventually defeated. With the cost of living rising and massive layoffs in response to the global financial crisis, the new government prioritizes the incorporation of ICT in all sectors and an aggressive diversification program geared at cushioning the country from the unpredictability of international trends, including weather patterns. High investment in education and health revamps citizens' faith in the government. Following recommendations from the annual National Youth Conference, the government and CSOs positively engage youth militia groups countrywide. 2017 is greeted with headlines of a 48-year-old female president who was elected by a united front across the country. Her focus is on strengthening government institutions, reviewing and harmonizing national policies, while encouraging affirmative action for historically marginalized areas. The 2019 referendum for joining the East Africa Community Political Federation is defeated, with people wanting to retain the economic union only. Kenya hosts a series of Somali peace talks which culminate in the signing of a treaty in 2020. As the government introduces a policy that restricts families to 3 children, the 2019 census results show a rise in single-parent households. There is growing support for the liberalization of same-sex marriages, and the 2020 Supreme Court's finding of polyandry as constitutional causes sharp divides between liberals and conservative elements. In 2022, the incumbent is re-elected by a small majority as the opposition unites under social conservatism and stands against the prohibitive cost of government policies which they label as populist and economically unsustainable. With a renewed strength in the parliament after a narrow loss, they keep the incumbent on toes. A stable and peaceful Somalia applies to join the EAC in 2025 and is accepted. Piracy has diminished to a negligible trickle, and the East African seaboard is one of the most profitable regions for global investment, prompting a rise in GDP. Unemployment figures, while still high, finally begin to drop. A constitutional amendment in 2026 legalizing same-sex marriages narrowly passes in both houses, bringing to scrutiny the role of religion in national life. In 2027, the incumbent retires and a new president, backed by a coalition of conservative parties, wins the elections. Affirmative action programs are wound up or downsized, with the government arguing that they have accomplished their goal. In 2027, the country begins to put measures to counter the drought expected in 2028. Kenya is not only able to feed its entire population, but also continues to export food. In 2028, the former president becomes the youngest recipient of the Mo Ibrahim Leadership Award. After being implicated in a corruption scam, the president resigns and is succeeded by his deputy. As the country approaches the 2032 elections, the youth bulge is celebrated as Kenya's biggest resource because of the highly skilled workforce. However, attention begins to shift towards the transition to a mature population structure. The four scenarios suggest four different paths for Kenya's youth. The question is not whether they will happen, but what we should do if any possibilities occurred. We are all standing at a crossroads, each one of us. Citizens and leaders must choose how we walk forward.
Audio Jungle.